All right, let's dive into something that I think a lot of us have wondered about. You know that fierce, unwavering loyalty people have for a political leader, even when really serious allegations start popping up? Today, we're going to get into the psychology behind what makes that support so strong. Right? I mean, it's a real head scratcher. When a leader's actions seem to totally contradict the values their own supporters say they believe in, why does that support so often seem unshakable? Well, a team of researchers decided to dig into this very puzzle. And to figure it out, they didn't just look at polls or headlines. Nope. They went back to a classic psychological theory. There's this brand new study, actually, out in the Journal of Social and Political Psychology, and it suggests the answer isn't really in the political world at all. It's all happening inside our own heads. And the key idea here is something called cognitive dissonance. You've probably felt this before, even if you didn't know the name for it. It's that mental tug-of-war, when you're trying to hold two completely contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time. That uncomfortable, kind of staticky feeling, yeah, that's cognitive dissonance. So you can think of it as this state of, well, intense mental friction. And look, this has nothing to do with just politics. It's a totally human thing. Our brains are basically hardwired to want consistency. So when that consistency gets broken, it creates this really powerful, genuine sense of unease. And this slide just nails that internal battle perfectly. So on one hand, you've got this core belief. My leader is a good, moral person. But then, bam, you get hit with new information. My leader is being accused of some pretty immoral or even illegal stuff. Your brain is now stuck holding both of these opposing ideas at once. And believe me, that is a recipe for some serious mental discomfort. Yeah, that internal conflict, it creates this really powerful feeling of mental discomfort. And it's not some passive thing we can just ignore. It's a huge motivator. It actually pushes our brains to find a solution to resolve that tension and get back to a sense of inner peace, like as fast as possible. So, how does our brain do it? How does it find that relief? Well, as you can see here, there are basically three main escape routes. The first one, just change one of the beliefs. Second, and this is a big one, just reject the new information altogether. Or third, you can kind of shrink the conflict down and decide it's not that big of a deal. Each one is a subconscious trick to just turn down that mental noise. Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's see how this actually plays out in the real world. Researchers set up a series of studies to find out exactly which of these mental tricks supporters of Donald Trump were using when they were faced with this exact kind of conflict. And the study design was really clever. They did it in 3 parts, and they timed each one to a moment of huge political pressure. First, right before Trump's first impeachment. Then, immediately after the House voted on it. And then, a couple of years later, after those public hearings about January 6th. So, high-stakes moments. The method itself was pretty straightforward, but really powerful. They got supporters online, showed them actual news articles with all these different allegations, and then just asked them, hey, in your own words, explain why you still support him. And this gave the researchers a direct window into how people were actually reasoning through this stuff. Okay, and the results, man, they give us a fascinating look at cognitive dissonance in action. So let's break down what they actually found. So in those first 2 studies, 3 main justification strategies really jumped out. The most common one, by far, used by about half the participants, was just straight-up denial. They just didn't believe the accusations. That's a textbook example of rejecting the new information. The other 2 big ones, saying his policies mattered more than his personality and pointing out that other politicians do similar things, those are both ways of basically minimizing the problem, right? Making the conflict seem less important. But here's something that's really interesting. The study's author, Cindy Harmon-Jones, noticed this pattern in the actual words people were using. She said, and I'm quoting here, "I was surprised to see that many of the participants used very similar language. They repeated Trump's phrases like fake news and drain the swamp." Which kind of suggests that these public catchphrases can become these powerful shared tools for a whole group of people to deal with that same individual mental discomfort. And get this, by the time they got to the 3rd study, the one that happened after the January 6th hearings, that reliance on just flat-out denial got even stronger. A full 60% of participants just said the accusations were false. It's like, as the psychological pressure ramped up, so did the need to just reject the conflicting information entirely. And this right here, this is really the heart of the study's findings.
The researchers didn't just ask people what they thought, they actually measured how much the information bothered them. And what they found was a direct link. The more psychological distress a person felt reading this stuff, the more likely they were to just claim it wasn't true.
This also points to another really common psychological strategy that was going on, something called compartmentalization. This is exactly what's happening when you hear someone argue that a leader's personal life has nothing to do with their public duties. They're basically building a mental wall between two conflicting ideas. If the ideas are in separate boxes, they can't clash, right? No more tension.
So, what does all of this tell us? What does it mean for our brains when they get put under this kind of pressure? When they're hit with information that challenges our most deeply held beliefs?
Well, the big takeaway here is this. When we see someone rejecting information that challenges their core beliefs, it's often not some calm, rational, logical process. What this study really shows is that it can be an active, deeply emotional response. It's a defense mechanism, a way to protect ourselves from what feels like real psychological pain.
Now, of course, we gotta keep the context of this study in mind. The findings are based on samples of people they found online. And for now, these findings really only apply to supporters of Donald Trump. Like the researchers themselves say, we're going to need more research to see if these same patterns would show up with supporters of other leaders from any party.
And that really brings it all back home to a more personal question for all of us. Think about it. When you are confronted with information that truly challenges a belief that is core to who you are, how do you respond? Do you lean into it with curiosity? Or does your brain kind of kick into gear to make that uncomfortable feeling just go away? The answer might tell us a lot more about ourselves than we think.